Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you might be. My name is Sean, and I'm delighted you are joining us for today's ESBC community webinar. Today I'm joined by Vlad, MVP, who will cover mitigating Microsoft 365 oversharing risks. We love hearing what you guys have to say, so remember to join in on the conversation about today's webinar and more on X. Our handle is @ESBC_community, and our hashtag is #ESBC24. Tweet us, tag us, and tell us what you learned. Don't forget to check out our Learning Hub, which is updated with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. You can access and view the Learning Hub by visiting our website, sharepointeurope.com, and clicking the Content tab at the top. Don't let the learning stop here. Continue to keep up and stay ahead by joining us for our next webinar, Powerful Tools for App Makers, How to Source and Use PCF Controls, with Michael and Scott Darrow, MVP. This webinar will take place Tuesday, 12th of November at 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. CET. For more information on this webinar, please check out www.sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. Final tickets for ESBC are almost gone. Join Europe's top Microsoft 365 conference to expand your knowledge, build connections, and stay ahead in the fast-evolving Microsoft ecosystem. Gain valuable insights and tools to reach your goals. Hurry! 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, or 4 day passes are available. Book now before they're gone at www.sharepointeurope.com/pricing. We're excited to announce the next EPBC 25 will be held in Vienna, Austria from the 16th to 19th of June 2025. Tickets for this highly anticipated event will be available soon, and you can be the first to know when they go on sale. Simply register your interest now to receive exclusive updates and special discount. Don't miss the opportunity to be a part of the biggest Power Platform event in Europe. Sign up today at www.sharepointeurope.com/European Power Platform Conference. After the webinar, we'll have a questions and answer session. Type any questions you might have into the questions box. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you'll be notified by email when it is available. And now, I'm going to pass you over to today's webinar presenter, Vlad. Hello, Vlad. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello there. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for the introduction. Let me share my screen over here. There, everybody should see it now. And I just wanted to mention, of course, thank you so much for having me. You talked about the conferences. Something you forgot to mention is use code VLAD10 if you register. This way you save 10% off. Sorry, I had to plug that in, but I'm really looking forward to ESBC in wow, in just a few weeks now. It's crazy, but let's focus on today for now. And thank you everybody for joining me on this webinar on mitigating Microsoft 365 oversharing risks. Let me introduce myself really quick. I've been a Microsoft MVP in SharePoint and Microsoft 365 for 11 years now. I'm also an MCP and an author on Pluralsight, where you can find a lot of my on-demand training. And I also work at Cisco as a technical evangelist, which is the sponsor of this webinar. But today, we are really going to talk about what are all the things you can do with Microsoft 365 out of the box to mitigate oversharing. The first thing we'll cover is, what is oversharing? And what does that even mean? We hear that term so much, but what does it actually mean? We'll then talk about how we can control external sharing in Microsoft 365. We'll talk about Teams, SharePoint, groups, and more. And then we're going to take a look at some of the more advanced options. Please do not hesitate to ask questions. That is the benefit of a live webinar. I'm here, I'm real, I'm doing this live. So if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask them. I don't want to do a monologue for the next 60 minutes, so please do not hesitate, and we'll get to all of them by the end of the webinar. Let's start with what is oversharing. And I wanted to see how does everybody define oversharing. So I did a quick Google search, and of course, I realized that oversharing is used so much, whether it's part of your personal life and do not share too much stuff on social media about where you are and things like that, to, of course, our enterprise world. So, like when using AI, it's good to be specific when you search for stuff, when you ask things. So, let's get a bit more focused and learn what is oversharing in Microsoft 365. The thing is, Microsoft made it so easy to share content in Microsoft 365, which as an end user is really amazing. And as a user of SharePoint, of Teams, it's so easy to share content with both internal and external users. And sometimes we create some links that are accessible forever because, let's be honest, users are lazy. So the default option, if your default option is to create a link that never expires, it's anonymous with edit access, that's the path that most users will take. They will always take the shortest path. And when you create those links that remain accessible forever, it's like handing out the keys to your home uh, and not knowing when somebody will use it. So you don't necessarily, invite them in. You just give them the keys, and you don't know when they're going to decide to take that opportunity. And one of the problems that we really have in a way with Microsoft 365, it's not super easy to discover who has access to what with the number of broken permissions that we have in SharePoint. Because every time you go to a library, you share a file with somebody and you don't select people that already have access, well, you just broke permissions to that item. So modern or companies that have adopted SharePoint Online for a while, the permission structure is quite complicated because of all the broken permissions. And of course, we have different risks depending on the audience. The risk that most people are scared of is external users, right? Because we're like, we don't want external users to have access to our data. We're afraid that people from other companies that don't work there anymore might still have access to our data. So whenever I talk about oversharing, a lot of people just think at external users, but honestly, internal users or insider risk is also a great risk. And if you look at the Gartner research over the past year, a lot more chief information security officers, they're more and more worried about internal risk because what happens if a user gets compromised? Let's be honest, no matter how much security training we give to people, there's always somebody that's going to click on that free iPhone email or that free gift card email. But we want to make sure that if that internal user ever gets compromised, they don't have the keys to the kingdom and they just have access to all of your data. We want to make sure that even internal users have just in time and just enough access to their Microsoft 365 resources. So if ever they get compromised, it's limited to what a malicious user could access. Also, what if that internal user is the malicious user? You want to make sure that, hey, they're about to leave the company, they don't need access to everything because they could extract that information. So really, oversharing applies to both external users and internal users. And let's be honest, this has been the case for the last decade. So there's nothing new here that you don't already know. But something that happened late last year, beginning of this year, is this thing that Microsoft, everyone you talk to at Microsoft has to say every 5 words, which is Copilot. And I always say that AI or Copilot for us in the Microsoft world is the great amplifier because even if before you had broken permissions, people needed to know how to access it. People needed to know how to search for something in order to find it. You couldn't just discover it. But with AI, a user can ask something that might be very innocent. In my example here, are there any recent documents that talk about media communications? And Copilot answers like, hey, there's a recent document titled Layoffs Project Plan for 2024. What if I was not supposed to have access to this site? Uh, that is where AI really amplifies oversharing, because I don't need to search for something specific. I didn't ask it, are there any layoffs coming up next? Or are there any sites about layoffs? I didn't know what I was searching for. I was searching for media communications, and it gave me a project plan for layoffs. Of course, if I was supposed to have access to that website, great job, uh, of course. However, what if I wasn't? What if that's a site I was not supposed to have access to? That's some of the risks that we need to mitigate in Microsoft 365. But you know what? Let's start by talking external sharing settings. And don't worry, I know it's, especially if you're joining from North America, where I am from Canada. Uh, Thank you so much for waking up so early in the morning, and I'll make sure that I'll go to the demo soon. I don't want to put you right back to sleep. And if you're in Europe, it's probably right after lunch. So don't worry, a demo's in just a few minutes. This way, we all stay awake. But one of the challenges we have with external sharing in Microsoft 365 is that we have so many different containers, right? We have OneDrive, we have Teams, we have SharePoint. Then we have the concept of Microsoft 365 groups, that is both a collection of collaboration resources as well as a security group that we need to manage. And then can we add permissions to SharePoint files? Even if the SharePoint site is in an M365 security group, do we need to add them to the whole M365 security group? Uh, One of the things is we have a lot of flexibility with Microsoft, which again is amazing, but it can also cause a lot of confusion. And then we, of course, have SharePoint sites that are not even connected to an M365 group. Think at your communication sites. Think at your SDS3 template, your non-group connected site. So we have a ton of different options. And because we have that flexibility, we actually have three different places where we can configure external sharing for collaboration. And of course, today we'll only talk collab, but we can configure external sharing in SharePoint, in groups, and inside Teams. So let's talk. And of course, I am a bit biased. SharePoint is where I started my Microsoft tech career, so we'll cover SharePoint first. On the SharePoint level, we can actually control settings both at the site collection level, at the tenant level, sorry. So we can configure settings that apply to the whole tenant, or we can also configure them at the site collection level, which of course, I know that most IT pros still call it site collection. Site is the proper term to use now. We're not supposed to use site collection anymore, but it's tough to change after you use the same term for 20 years. So I still put site collection in there just because that's what everybody is used to. So we can have a tenant level default, and then we can even be more strict for certain sites. And we can also control settings for either everything OneDrive or only specific OneDrive sites. And I know I promised you demos, so I'm not going to make you wait here. Let's see how we can control external sharing in SharePoint Online. So I'll go to every admin's favorite SharePoint, favorite website, which is the SharePoint Online Admin Center. So if I want to configure external sharing, I will go to policies and then sharing. Let me zoom in a tiny bit so I make sure that everybody can see properly. The first thing you can configure is you have this SharePoint and OneDrive option here, and you can configure what is the maximum level that people are allowed to share with. Is it anyone? So can people share anonymous? Can they share with new and existing guests? So can they invite new people as well as people that are already existing inside your Entra ID directory? only existing guests. This is very useful if you have it, if your Enter ID or your identity admin already has a user onboarding process, then you can say, hey, you know what? You can invite anybody you want as long as they went to the Enter ID onboarding process, because then they signed all the papers, then they're trusted and everything. So you can have that option, or you can say only people in your organization. Now, I'll tell you a funny story. For like 1 or 2 years after Microsoft uh, put this out, I was sure this was just a display and you couldn't actually play with it. And I was doing everything via PowerShell. And after somebody said, Vlad, why don't you just use the toggle and just move it like that? I was like, you can do that? So a lot of those settings are super easy. You can do it straight from the UI. And as you can see that, you know what, for OneDrive, my users can only share with people in the organization, but for SharePoint, they can go anonymous or they can go to new and existing guests. However, there is a limitation. Your SharePoint cannot be your OneDrive cannot be more permissive than your SharePoint. So, for example, you see, if I put SharePoint to anyone and OneDrive to anyone, if I put SharePoint to new and existing guests, OneDrive for Business automatically follows. So your OneDrive will always be as or more restrictive than your SharePoint settings. Let's leave it to anyone for now. This way we unlock all the settings. Now, let's take a look at the really cool stuff here, and let's take a look at managing more external sharing settings. Something we can do is limiting external sharing by domain. So imagine that you want to make your users more productive, which I hope every IT admin wants to, but you also want to sleep at night and you don't want people inviting users with Hotmail, Outlook, or even older MSN accounts, if anybody still has those. Uh, you really want to allow your users to collaborate with your vetted partners. You can actually decide to create an allow list for domains. So you can say that, hey, people from my organization can invite anybody as long as the person they invite is in one of those domains. And I can add more here. So for example, I can do espc.tech because now I'm working with ESPC and I want to be able to have a site where we can work together. So you can add a list of domains and that becomes your allow list. People can only share with persons from this domain. You also have the option to block specific domains. I haven't seen that many companies use this option, if I'm honest here, because most people usually like to have that allow list. But the block specific domain comes in when, let's say you want to allow people to share with any company, but you still want to block public Hotmail, Outlook, Yahoo, Gmail account. So you have your list of specific domains to block, and users can invite anybody as long as they're not in those domains. So I'll actually take it off for now. Now, one of my favorite settings that not enough people use is allow only users in specific security groups to share externally. One of the biggest reasons why things are overshared is not because people want your company to fail. It's not because people are bad intentioned. It's because they make mistakes. Users are not usually well trained. And that's why you go work in a lot of companies and they have everything locked down. Why do they have it locked down? Because one person 5 years ago did a big mistake, so now we lock it down for everybody. But what if I can say that, let me search here for, I probably have an HR employees group here. I can say, people in HR can share with authenticated guests only. And let's say people in finance can share with anyone. So I can give you that example. So those are just some groups that I have in my tenant, but how would you use this? Imagine that you have a security group for everybody that passed level 1 training. So everybody that did level 1 security training, they can share with authenticated guests only. And anybody that passed level 2 security training or SharePoint power user or whatever criteria you want to have, then they're allowed to share with anyone. So you don't just apply a blanket policy the same to everybody. You're now saying, you know what? When somebody joins the company, they're brand new. I have no idea about their security or SharePoint skills. They're not allowed to share anything externally. But as they go through your required trainings, then they can share more widely. You can also make this, for example, I know a lot of you might work for companies that have a lot of field workers or part-time workers. You can say that, hey, only full-time employees are able to share externally. So you don't, again, you don't have a blanket policy for everybody from your full-time marketing person that needs to share stuff with a design team somewhere to the part-time worker that works 10 hours a week in a store. They're not the same risk, they're not the same person. And by configuring security groups that are allowed to share differently, you're able to apply different policies to them, which is pretty amazing. Then let's keep going on our list. Allow guests to share items that they do not own. Do you want to allow it? Yes or no? Usually I like to say no. If a guest is not an owner of a site, which let's be honest, most of the time never should be, do you want them, if they only have edit permissions or member permission, to still share content? I like to say no. Do you want guest access to a site or OneDrive to expire automatically after a number of days? Really interesting. One of the big problems that we see today is that I invite somebody to my site, and very valid request. I need them to work on something right now, but once they finish their work, why do they need to still have access to my site? We need to create a way to automatically remove people that should not be there anymore. And that's part of the uh, permission lifecycle that many companies have done on paper. They've done it a lot for, for their in Entra ID and things like that, but not necessarily in SharePoint. So that's something that a lot of companies are missing. I can say that, you know what, after 60 days, they will automatically expire. And about 2 weeks before the site owner, when they go to the site, they'll have a big yellow warning. Hey, you have this user, Vlad, their external access will expire. Their guest access to the site will expire in 10 days or in 2 weeks. Does Vlad still need access to this site? The site owner can say yes, and bam, I'm extended for another 60 days. So it's not an automatic. The site owner can extend their access if it makes sense. But by implementing this, you make sure that there is a way to automatically clean external users that should not be there anymore. Now let's talk about the type of link that's selected by default. And let me go here. Let me go to one of my sites. Let's take a look at an example of what I mean. And I don't know about your users, but most of the companies I work with and everything in life, I like to say that a lot of the times people are lazy. So how do they share stuff? They go to a folder, they click the share item here, and they will probably, if depending on how the settings are, it looks like I actually pre-did the demo on this one. Let me just go to the settings and I'm showing you stuff in advance before, let me go to the same as organization level setting. Uh, that's what happens when you configure your tenant too well and then you want to show a badly done one and you're like, oops, I cannot show the broken stuff. But we did a quick fix. I'll show you what I did in a second there. A lot of the times I go to share here, and what happens if my default settings are anyone can edit. So if somebody doesn't go to link settings here, which let's be honest, most users will not, they will go copy link and they will create an anonymous link with edit permissions, which is bad. You don't want that in your tenant because then 90% of your links will actually be the default type. So it's important that even if you allow people to share anonymous with edit, you make the default as restrictive as possible. Because by default, those are actually the permissions that are inside a SharePoint tenant. So what I like to do is, first of all, choose the type of link that's selected by default when users share files and folders in SharePoint and OneDrive, I like to do specific people. So only the people that the user specifies. This way, again, even if they're allowed to do anonymous, they have to make the decision. They have to go in the link options and select anonymous. They made a conscious decision to make that link anonymous. It was not a default option. And the same thing for choose the permissions that's selected by default for sharing links. You don't want it to be edit. You want it to be view because, again, even if you allow edit, you want the user sharing to say, you know what, I'll make this permission greater and I'll allow edit. It becomes a conscious decision to make it, to give more permission, and it's not just a default one. Also, for anonymous links, you can say, do we want anonymous links to expire? Maybe we can put it at 30 days or 10 days. Like, you know what? Hey, I allow you to do anonymous links. However, only for 10 days. I don't want the anonymous link to live on forever. I want it to only be valid for 10 days. And you can also say, you know what? I'll allow anonymous, but only for viewing. Our company policy, if ever you want to share something, like say a brand guideline or something with a user outside, yeah, sure, they can view it, but we don't want to allow external editing in anonymous, because the problem with that is if you then go in the unified audit log, you see a document has been sharing by a certain IP address 10 times, but you do not know who actually modified the document. So I see a lot of organizations where they have anonymous with view, but they do not allow anonymous with edit, because as soon as content gets edited or deleted, they want to know exactly who did it. Other settings we have is, do you want to show owners the names of people who viewed their files in OneDrive? Do you want to, again, let site owners choose to display the names of people who viewed files or pages in SharePoint? And do you want to use short links for sharing files and folders? You know what? Let me just do the domain thing and save everything else as is. Hopefully everything should be okay. And then I want to show you. So this is our tenant level setting. This is our tenant level baseline. But what I kind of did before really quick, but now I'll actually explain it, is you can go to a specific site. So let's say I go to conference resources over here. Let's go to settings. For a specific site, I can decide, you know what, for this site is only new and existing guests. I do not want anyone. So even if you have a tenant level baseline, you can restrict it more for certain sites, because let's be honest, some sites are way more sensitive than others. So I can say, you know what, this one is only for people in my organization, as an example. I'll put it back to anyone. This way we can see all of the different settings. I can then say, you know what, for this site, I want to further limit the sharing by domain. When you do it at the site level, you can choose a subset of the sites that are at the tenant level. So for example, I cannot allow hotmail.com here because it's not part of the domains that's allowed at the tenant level. So if I work with a new partner, I need to add it at the tenant level first, and then I can allow it at a specific site. So I'll give you an example of when this becomes useful. Let's say that my company works with two competing brands. Let's say, and I'm inventing here, I'm a marketing company, and I work with both Pepsi and Coca-Cola, and each one of them has a SharePoint site where I work with them. I want to make sure I go to the Coca-Cola site and say, I only allow people from the Coca-Cola domain. And on the Pepsi side, I'll only allow people from the Pepsi domain. I don't want somebody adding the wrong John or the wrong insert common name in there to the wrong company site. That can be a huge breach of contract confidentiality and all of that. I never give Vlad as an example because I feel there's never two Vlads working for the same company. So I never give Vlad, but John, Alex, Sean, names that are a bit more common than Vlad, it can happen, especially that we don't always see once a guest is in there, we don't always see the email clearly. We just look at the name. But I can add, for example, you see, as soon as I start typing, it shows me one of the sites that was in my tenant allow list. So again, I could say only allow people from Microsoft.com in this site. Then for the expiration, I can decide for a specific site. When we talked about automatically expiring guests, most of the time, most of the settings at the site level need to be more restrictive than the tenant level, but there are a few of them that can be more permissive. For example, I can say that, you know what, for this site, guest access doesn't expire automatically. Let's say we have a brand documents where marketing has all of the public facing, in a way, brand documents that they have, what fonts to use, the logos, things like that. And kind of everybody marketing works with, they just add them to that site. That info is kind of public anyway. I don't want to expire guests automatically. That can be an example. Or I can say, you know what, they expire, but not every 30 days. Maybe in that site, they expire every 120 days. I can also decide what is the default sharing link type for that site. I can have same as organization level, which is the default, or I can say, you know what, for this site, I will make it anonymous. So you do have the option for some of them to say, hey, you know what, even if they expire after, I think we put 10 days at the tenant level, I can make it 60 days for this site. So you do have some permissions to to customize it for the specific site. And this is what I love a bit about it, is that even if we want to be more secure, we have that flexibility where every site is unique. Let's be honest, every site has unique requirements. So you can customize it. And something else that you can do that is really, really cool is if you have a custom provisioning engine, you can actually say, hey, you know what? Part of my custom provisioning for project sites, I will have a different type of settings applied at the site level. Maybe I want to onboard a new partner, and that partner is not part of the allowed domains. Maybe part of my custom provisioning process, I will add that in there. So you have a lot of flexibility. I showed you the admin center versions, but you also have all of those settings available in PowerShell as well. So if you want to automate everything that I just showed you, we can. So this is it for external sharing in SharePoint. Now let's talk about Microsoft 365 groups. So if we go to groups over here, and to manage group sharing settings, we have to go to Entra ID. So I'll go to Entra ID over here. I will go to external identities, and then I will go, let's go here to external collaboration settings. The setting that I want to show you is here at the bottom. And let me try to minimize some of the side menus here so you can see better. On the collaboration restrictions, you see, I can decide, do I want to allow invitations to a group? And this will, of course, also apply to Microsoft Teams, right? Because you cannot add somebody to a team without being in a group. So this also would block Teams access, but do you want to allow invitations only to the specified domains? So you actually have a different allow list or block list at the Entra ID level when you want to add people to Microsoft 365 groups. Hopefully you have all of that in sync, and this is where it becomes important for administrators to talk to each other and make sure that all the settings are in sync, as well as of course make sure that if you automate it, which I highly encourage you to, you add it to all the different places. uh, Great, so this is one setting. And also the other setting we have in Entra ID, this one actually applies to Teams. So you know what, let me come back to it here in a second. Let me go to the Teams admin center first. Let's go to admin.microsoft.com and let me go to the Teams admin center. And in the Teams Admin Center, we have more external sharing settings because I know I didn't cover enough yet. We do have more. So let me go to Teams settings here a little bit. I love it when right before the meeting, they just change the location on me here. Let's go to, well, first of all, guest access here. Do you want to have guest access on or off for Teams? And then I'll zoom in a tiny bit here. I just realized might be a bit small for the screen. So you can say, hey, on or off for guest access in Teams. So I might want to allow people in groups, people in SharePoint external, but not in Teams. I do have that option. And then I can select what are all the things that guests can do inside Teams. So for example, I can say that, you know what, guests cannot share the whole screen. Guests can only share a single application. Guests cannot edit or delete sent messages. They cannot delete a chat, or guests cannot send GIFs, or if they do GIFs, they can only send PG-13 GIFs based on their content rating. So even in Teams, you have a ton of different settings on, do you want to allow guest users? And if yes, you can actually tighten a bit what are the things they're allowed to do. And if we go to external access, which very important, external access does not mean guest access. Guest access is for B2B guests, is when you create a user inside your Entra ID, they have access to SharePoint, Teams, groups, all of that. External access is federation. You know, when you open up Teams and then you just chat with somebody in another domain, this is what external access is. For Teams, you can have another allow or block domain list for basically Teams external chat. That's the easiest way to put it. So you can actually have, again, a third domain block and allow list. Remember when I said it's important to communicate and to make sure that hopefully you automate and everything is in sync? Because the last thing you want is somebody to be allowed to do something in SharePoint, but not in Teams. It'll confuse users a lot. Like, why can I talk to Vlad? Why can I add Vlad in SharePoint, but I cannot chat to Vlad, or I cannot add Vlad in a group? I really encourage you to automate all those allow and block lists and make sure to keep them in sync. The final setting I want to cover for Teams, and then we'll take a look at a few more advanced settings, are, let me go here to external identities, cross-tenant access settings. So wow, it's kind of already more than a year ago, Microsoft added shared channels. And for shared channels, they do not use B2B. They use another type of authentication, another type of external identity, which are cross-tenant access settings. So if you want to configure cross-tenant access settings, you need to add organizations. Really important. Everything else was domain based. What does that mean? Let's say that you work with Vlad, you work with me. There are 3 domains. Let's say you work with me, and yeah, let's say you work with Cisco as an example. And even if we're one company, we might have emails at cisco.com, and we might have emails with the product name at ciscopoint.com. And people, depending if they're sales marketing or they're in the product team, they might have a different domain name in their email, even if we're only one organization. On the other 3 lists I showed you before in SharePoint, B2B, and external access and federation, you need to add the specific domain. But for cross-tenant, you can just add the organization, and you can actually even search by, it doesn't find Syskit, let me try vnext.solutions. Explain hard to get right now. Hopefully you get to find the uh, tenant ID, but usually the searching by domain should work. Let's do, if I do vnext solutions inc.onmicrosoft.com, let's see, will this work better? Or it actually doesn't like me. Looks like it doesn't like me today. So what usually happens, because you can see you can search for one of its domain names, so I'm not lying to you. This should work. It's the beauty of live demos, but you can add organizations and you can enable shared channels with that specific organization. You don't need to add each one of their domains. You only need to add the organizations, and all the domains they use in that tenant will automatically be approved. So if we take a look at what are the different ways to configure it, the least restrictive should be at the Entra ID level, and you go down to where you can have settings for group specific. For certain groups, you want to disable external access, or for site collections, but really you should be least restrictive at the top, and as you go down to the item level, to the, well, the smallest container, which is the group or the SharePoint site, you can be most restrictive there. So you can have 10 domains allowed in Entra ID and SharePoint, but only 1 domain allowed for a specific SharePoint site. So I see we have about 15 minutes left, and I really want to give time for some Q&A. So let's take a look at what are some of the more advanced Microsoft 365 settings. And the first one I want to talk about is SharePoint Premium Data Access Governance. This is something, I don't really want to call it new because it's been out for like a year now, but it's still new because not a lot of people use it, to be honest. And data access governance gives us 3 different reports to find potentially overshared content. And I know I'll get licensing questions. So yes, it does require the SharePoint Premium Advanced Management license. So this is something that is a premium license for Microsoft. So you need SharePoint Premium for this, but still it's kind of cool. If I go to reports here and you have SharePoint Premium Advanced Management, or I think it might be included with some E5 licenses as well now, you go to reports, you have the sharing links report. You can go into view reports here, and then you have 3 different reports. The anyone links, the people in your organization links, and specific people links shared externally. There are some limitations to this because you see it says status updated 2 months ago, and I did that on purpose. So let me talk to you about some of the limitations. First of all, it takes about 6 to 8 hours or even up to 24 hours for it to run. So never run it right before a demo because it will be running and you cannot view the actions. Also, another huge limitation for it, it will only show you links for files and folders in the last 28 days. So you see, even if Right now in anyone over here, you see I have 2 sites that were found. If I refresh the report and the anyone links are still there. However, they were not shared in the past 28 days. They would not show up in the report anymore. So it's really limited to the links that have been created in the past 28 days. So really important that you run it often. Once I click on the report, you see summary again for the last 28 days, number of sites that were scanned, 19. Of course, it's a demo tenant. I do not have a ton of sites. And there are 2 sites that have anyone links in them. And I can see that I have my SAM5 overshared site and my conference resources. And I can see that, hey, you know what, this, and you can see I created them on purpose over shared site, but this site has 6 links created in the past 28 days, and this one has 3. And remember, it's the past 28 days from when I ran this report. So it only applies from August 13 to September 9. So it might not be the case right now today because we are in November. Uh, but it was the case when I ran the report, and I can see information such as, do they have Teams enabled? What is the template? Do they have a sensitivity label? What is the unmanaged device policy? If I click on here, it just brings me to the site. And if I want, I can also download a detailed report. And this is really useful. I'll drag it here on a second. But what this does is just that the UI will only display up to 100 sites, while the CSV, which got downloaded here, can display up to 1,000,000 sites. So if ever you have more than 100 sites, which I'm sure most of you have, but it's a demo tenant, so my imagination has limits. I only have 19. I don't need this report because it's the same exact information. Now, really important, this report tells me, hey, Vlad, you have a problem in this site, but it doesn't tell me, Vlad, here are the 6 items. It just points me in the right direction, but it doesn't give me the exact answer. So it's like a great mentor, just tells me where to look, but doesn't give me the full answer in a way. And I have the same type of report for people in your organization link and things like that. So I have different types of reports that I can run, and hopefully you run them quite often. So because again, limited to the last 28 days. So you want to run them at least every 28 days to know what are your potentially overshared sites. So that is for data access governance. Now, let's say, wow, data access governance told me I have a big problem on a site. Like this site is way too overshared. I don't know the exact item, so I don't know how to fix it quite yet. However, I want to secure it. This is where SharePoint Premium Restricted Access Control comes in. SharePoint Premium, and because we're running, I would say short on time, but I want to make sure I finish on time, I will show it to you in action. So for SharePoint Premium Advanced Management, and I will go to this site here, what I can do once I go to settings, I can say, you know what, this site, whatever the permissions that are on the site, I want to restrict access to up to 10 security groups. So if I have an HR site that might be overshared, that can be a huge problem. I only want HR employees to be able to access it. It doesn't mean that all HR employees will automatically be added, but what it means is that if you're not in that security group, you're not able to access it. So I'll just go to the site. I'll give you an example once it allows me to share over here. Let's give it a few more seconds for the options to appear. Let's go to site permissions. You see I have restricted site accesses on. Only people from the following groups can access the site. Right now, I only have Vlad. You know what? Let me add Vanessa Lee in here. and let me add Vanessa Lee as an owner. So I'm a user. I shared this site with Vanessa Lee here. Let me copy the URL. And now let me log in. You see here I'm logged in with Vanessa Lee. If I try to access the site, I have an access denied. So even if technically I have permissions to this site, or I had permissions to that site before we put on restricted access control, I get an access denied. But I get a different access denied than the you don't have permissions. It says your organization policies prevent you from seeing content on this site. So it doesn't tell me, Vanessa, you do not have permissions, request permissions. It tells me you have access, but there is a policy in place that stops you even if you have access. So restricted access control is an amazing way to make sure that, again, for both external and internal users, that only people from a certain security group are allowed to access the site. Even if a user by accident or on purpose shares with somebody from outside that security group, they would get blocked by the restricted access control policy. So that is quite amazing. And the other thing that restricted access control can do, you see, this was a team site without a Microsoft 365 connected group. And it does the same thing here with, if I have a communication site, it allows me to put up to 10 security groups. Yes, dynamic groups are accepted as well. So I can put up to 10 of them that are allowed to. If you have a Microsoft 365 connected group site, so you see here it says private group, my settings look a bit different. So if I go here to restricted site access, I only have a checkbox. This will basically only allow access to the SharePoint site if people get added to the group. So if I go to the site here, let's give it a second. I always love it loads super fast, but the options load a bit later. If I go to site permissions, and you see Vanessa has access to the site. So because when you add members to a group connected site, you can either add them to the group and give them access to the mailbox, planner, Teams, or only to the SharePoint site. Restricted access control will block you sharing only the SharePoint site. So again, if I go to, let me copy, doesn't matter, I'll copy the whole URL here. Let me go to Vanessa. Even if Vanessa has access, I get the same error here on this URL because I need to add Vanessa to the group if I want Vanessa to have access to the SharePoint site. I cannot just add Vanessa to the only to the SharePoint site anymore. The last thing, and I hope all of you have some great questions planned for me, but the last thing I want to talk about before we're done are access reviews. And I'm sure you will have access to the slides after if you want to look at them. Before falling asleep tonight, I'll make sure to make them available. But let's just go in a demo, which is way more fun. So what are access reviews here? I'll zoom out a little bit. I'll go under identity governance, and here I have access reviews. You need Entra ID P2 for that. So let me create an access reviews, walk you through the process, and then you'll understand what it means. Imagine that every month, every 3 months, every 6 months, I want to engage the owners of the group to make sure that they should still have access to a certain resource. So I can say, okay, you know what? Select the teams and groups. I want to say, and I don't have that many, of course, here. Let's say finance employees here, click on select. I can have different policies for different groups. I can say all of them with guests. So I have quite a lot of flexibility. Doesn't matter. We'll do those 3 groups. Right now, who do I want to review? Very important. Remember, we talked about external risk and internal risk. I can review all the users. So if I have a project site, I want the project owner to look at the permissions and tell me, you know what, Vlad doesn't need to be in this site anymore. Vlad's part of the project is done. We can remove Vlad from there. So, okay, all users, let's go to next. And I can decide who will do the review. Is it the group owner? Is it selected people that I add? Is it users review their own access? Uh, this is very good for very mature organizations, but most of the time it's either the group owners, because let's be honest, group owners should always know who should have access to their group, or it should be the manager of the users. We've seen this a lot where you have a lot of part-time people and that might be in the same group and you just want their manager to decide what groups they should have access to. But the most popular one is the group owners. And you can even have a multi-stage review if you want to, which is kind of cool. I want the duration to be for 3 days. So once the access review starts, they'll have 3 days to answer it. And I want the review to happen quarterly, so every 3 months, or you can make it semi-annually if you want, really up to you. I want it to start today. And then, do I want to automatically apply the results to the resource? So if the owner says, yeah, remove Vlad, do you want the system to automatically remove Vlad, or do you want that to just be logged in the access review and then an admin will go in and actually do the removal? Usually I like to do auto reply results, and then if reviewers don't respond, the problem if you don't change is that people might stop answering them. Again, people are lazy. So what I like to do is Microsoft gives you a recommended action, depending, has the user accessed it, has the user logged in a certain amount of time, things like that. I like to do the take recommendation. So whatever Microsoft recommends based on the data. Of course, there will be some false positives. So let's say Vlad goes on a paternity leave for 6 months. When I come back, some people, because they didn't answer, Microsoft 365 might tell them, you know what, Vlad hasn't even logged in at 365 in the past 4 months. Remove Vlad from the group. So there can be some false positives that happen, but still, I'd rather have that and re-add the person to the resource than having no change. And then people know, yeah, even if I don't do it, nothing will actually change. So I prefer to do that. Do I want to send a notification to people once the review is done? Do I want to have a justification? And then I create it. In the interest of time, because I know Sean will come in soon and tell me, Vlad, you talk too much. Let me go and show you what it looks like on one that I created yesterday. So as an owner, I get a please review access to the Power Automate demo site group, which is a group that I was on in Vlad Talks Tech. I can start the review, and then here I can see what are all the people in my group, and I can decide, okay, you know what, for Vanessa, no longer needed on the project, click on submit. So you see the recommendation was approved, the decision was denied, it was reviewed by Vlad. So now you create this process where every month, 3 months, 6 months, the group owners go in and they actually see a flat list of everybody that has access to that group, and they can decide whether they should be there or not. So really important for you to, and you can always change your mind, by the way. I can see here, my bad, and go back to approve. But you create a process in which people automatically keep permissions up to date, in which people get removed if they shouldn't have access to. So kind of, if we look like at everything we learned today, we learned how to prevent oversharing by limiting domain access, by limiting default links, and also how we can go in and have a process that guests in SharePoint auto expire. We have access reviews that every 3 months we send it to the group owner and they remove the people that shouldn't be there anymore. So if you implement all of those things, you'll be able to reduce oversharing inside your tenant. And I just wanted to take the last 3 minutes because, well, thank you so much for Syskit for sponsoring this webinar. So just wanted to do just a really quick a bit on how can Syskit help, and really proud on the work we've been doing this year on helping organizations get Copilot ready. So in addition to all of the things that I showed you today that you can do out of the box, we really spent the last hour on everything you can do with only Microsoft 365. Some really cool things, my favorite things that Syskit adds on top of it is, first of all, the ability to not only know how many links I have, external sharing links I have in a site, but know exactly what items those links are on. And especially from a Copilot readiness point of view, I have a dashboard as an admin that was built using a ton of research on what do companies need to be to get Copilot ready and to stay Copilot ready. So we automatically surface for you what are all the workspaces with too many members, how many sharing links have been added, because getting Copilot ready is one thing, but staying Copilot ready is a different challenge. So we help you control oversharing from fixing what you have right now to fixing it every single month, and being proactive in fixing it. It helps you find all the different resources that somebody has access to, and being able to say, okay, what does Vlad access to? Or I want to know all the people that have access to a certain folder, really have access to all the information from a central dashboard for all your Microsoft 365 resources, which is amazing. And you can also create some amazing rules. So you can create access reviews, not only for Microsoft 365 groups, but also for SharePoint sites. You can find inactive sites, because let's be honest, one of the problems with AI is, do we have content that is no longer relevant that we want to get rid of? We don't want to have all that bad content into Copilot that can affect the quality of the result that people get. So we help you create a ton of different rules to make sure that you don't have a private workspace, a private team that somebody adds everyone except external users to it will automatically remove that. So you can create rules to make sure you stay compliant, you stay secure. So I really only wanted to take 2-3 minutes to talk about that. If ever you want to see a demo, make sure you go to syskit.com. You can try it in your own tenant for 21 days free. And Sean, I know
Yeah,
you told me I should only take 1 hour, and I think I took the full hour.
that's all right.
Well,
If you're
technically I
able to stay
started
on,
at
we can
about
take questions.
9:02, 9:03, So
Yeah,
are
that's
there
no
any
problem.
questions in the chat?
Yeah, so I just like to say thank you, Vlad, for a great presentation demo. So we're now getting to questions and answers part. Should you wish to ask a question, please feel free to type in the questions box now. So the first question is a long enough one. If someone will create a link, anyone with a link have access. Will this folder be available for that user when using Copilot as a place where the answer might be? So to narrow that, will the file share in that way be available in Copilot for all tenant users, or the permission will be registered in Entra only when a person specifically used that link?
Great question. So the question is, if I create a sharing link, everyone except external users, does it automatically share that item and does it become available in Copilot? No. So it only becomes available in Copilot. That permission is given only once the user clicks and accesses the link. So again, I'll go back to my house analogy. Creating the link is just giving out the key, but that permission is not registered until the user uses the key to get in the house, and then they'll have access to it. That permission is granted. So the link is just the key. The user doesn't have permission yet, but they could access it through that link if they want to. But from a Copilot perspective, only after they access the link that result will appear in Copilot.
Perfect. So here's the next question there, Vlad, is does everybody in the organization need the premium license or just the person who wants to run the oversharing link report?
Oh, that's the question I always get, and I hate to break people's hearts. So let me start by putting the legal warning is always talk to your Microsoft licensing professional because this is not legal advice and everything. But so according to Microsoft documentation, if you want to use SharePoint Premium Advanced Management, everybody in the company needs to be licensed for SharePoint Premium Advanced Management. So unfortunately, it's everybody. Again, for data access governance, I believe a recent change, Microsoft included it if you have a Microsoft 365 E5, but for like SharePoint Premium restricted access control that I showed you, everybody in the company needs to have SharePoint Premium Advanced Management.
Perfect. So I think just the last question there is, when you share a document with someone to do co-authoring, the other user can then share the document to whoever he wants. Is there a way to avoid resharing?
Absolutely. So that's one of the settings that we have seen. Of course, it will depend on what permission you gave to that user. But if you go here to sharing, you can have, where was it? I'll find it. Allow guests to share items that they do not own. So if you add a external user as a, and I guess we're talking external. If I add Sean as a member to my site, we're both working on a document. If I have this on, Sean could share it with other people. If I take this off, if Sean is only a member, could not share it. However, if I add my guest as an owner, then they could still share it. So, but most of the time we're only talking members here. So for guest users, you could turn this off and that should be good to go. The guest will not be able to share items unless they're an owner of it.
Perfect. So I think that's it. So on behalf of the ESBC community, we'd like to extend a big thank you to you again, Vlad, for taking the time out today to carry this webinar. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
So that's the end of today's webinar. You'll find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource center. Thanks again for y'all for joining us today, and I hope you join us again soon. Take care.
Bye-bye, everyone.